almost everything we do in groups. In modern life, that might be business groups, there's government groups, there's voluntary associations, there's our network of friends, there's our families. And in all of these cases, we have to coordinate our behaviors and work together. You could even say that cooperation, or more generally prosociality, behaving for the benefit of others and society as a whole, is the signature human adaptation. Even though we are adapted as a species to work in groups, certain conditions are still required. And when those conditions are in place, then we function so well that you could even call the group a super organism. But when these conditions are not in place, then the group can fail spectacularly.
Come in, gentlemen.
Spread out.
The problem of prosociality, or individuals functioning well in groups, is not just a human problem, it pervades the biological world. And evolutionary theory has a lot to say about when groups and how groups function well or poorly. Wouldn't it be great if we had a set of methods for causing any group to function better?
With this goal in mind, in 2009, David Sloan Wilson began to work with Elinor Ostrom, a political scientist who spent her career observing the conditions that made groups function effectively. She studied a particular kind of group, those attempting to manage common resources such as forests, fisheries, water, and pastures. Most experts believe that such resources would fall prey to overuse because of a problem known as the tragedy of the commons. A classic illustration is a pasture owned in common by a group of farmers. Since they all have equal rights to graze their cattle, each farmer's short-term interest is best served by grazing as many cattle as possible. However, if too many of them pursue their short-term interest, they'll deplete or even destroy the resource, hurting the long-term interests of everyone in the group, including themselves. Over decades of study, Ostrom and her colleagues discovered that groups who were managing common pool resources varied in their social organization, but those who were most successful shared certain characteristics. She identified 8 design principles that were shared by successful groups, and in 2009 was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics.
What we did together was to show that the design principles follow from evolutionary theory, the evolutionary dynamics of cooperation in all species, and our particular history as a highly cooperative species.
As a result, these principles apply to almost any human group whose members need to work together to achieve common goals, not just those trying to manage natural resources. So what are these design principles? Number 1, strong group identity and understanding of purpose. Number 2, fair distribution of costs and benefits. Number 3, fair and inclusive decision-making. Number 4, monitoring agreed-upon behaviors. Number 5, graduated sanctions for misbehaviors. Number 6, fast and fair conflict resolution. Number 7, authority to self-govern. Number 8, appropriate relations with other groups. The natural resource groups that Ostrom studied evolved these principles on their own. To achieve Wilson's goal of making any group function better would require another ingredient.
To do better is to change.
So Wilson began working with a group of psychologists who were experts on change to develop Prosocial, the science of working better together. The goal is to make it available to all kinds of groups, anywhere in the world.
Prosocial has 2 main pieces. The first piece has to do with psychological flexibility, because prosocial involves groups improving. That means changing. And change is not always easy. We know that's true for individuals, and it's also true for groups. So if you want to change as a group, you need to be flexible.
To teach change through psychological flexibility, they chose an evidence-based method called ACT, or Acceptance and Commitment Training.
ACT is a way of trying to open up to the whole of us, in consciousness, in context, and focus on what will move the whole of us forward. It allows us to sort of show up as a collection of many, many different things, but then also to grow and evolve in new directions.
The Prosocial development team adapted the methods of ACT to work effectively in groups. They use a device called the Matrix to encourage psychological flexibility, identifying thoughts and emotions, as well as actions and behaviors that take us either away from or toward our valued goals.
Now that they're flexible, what do? How do they design their group? And then the design principles come in.
What we ended up seeing is we could take some of the intervention principles that were in ACT and use it as a front end to open up the conversation in a group around the design principles.
Through an internet platform and a network of facilitators, Prosocial enables organizations to implement the design principles effectively, maximizing coordination and minimizing disruptive behavior within the group.
What the design principles get you is a social environment that's maximally favorable for cooperation.
Just like the groups studied by Ostrom, any group that lacks the design principles is likely to suffer from social dilemmas, similar to the tragedy of the commons.
The design principles are what's needed in order to prevent evolution from going in disruptive directions and to channel evolution to go in prosocial directions.
Prosocial is a method of channeling evolution, combining two evidence-based traditions, the design principles and acceptance and commitment training. However, the whole that emerges is even greater than the sum of these parts. The market for prosocial and its potential to affect positive change is enormous.